So, y'all like Persona? Yeah, you do. Or maybe you don't. Or maybe you haven't heard of it before. And if not, I'm glad I found you. Turn back now, there's still time! Then I'm surprised, especially lately. With the release of Persona 5, it really brought a whole new crowd of fans to the series. So, to capitalize on its success, Atlus released Persona 5. And from there, Persona 5. And to keep the ball rolling, they released Persona 5. And why let a hot streak die, right? Persona 5. Yeah, much like with P4 before it, Atlus's trip to the dairy farm doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. But then, Big Bro came home. Yes, in an ironic twist of fate, coming to end my apathy for the Persona 5 franchise comes Persona 3 Reload. Now, as of this recording, the game is yet to release, and who knows, maybe it could suck, but so far, I like what I'm seeing. So in honor of the game releasing this February, I wanted to reassess what it is about the OG Persona game that definitely had no games released before it that made it so special. Arcana by Arcana. The tarot has always been an interesting narrative aesthetic, for lack of a better term. It's one of those old belief systems or historic frameworks that are usually thrown onto stories without much consideration for their actual sources or context. A less esoteric example would be the 7 Deadly Sins or the Constellations or basically any popular mythology. Essentially, they're any pre-existing collective of ideas, characters, or symbols for you to attach your own ideas, characters, or symbols to. What makes the tarot unique is how far-reaching it is and the variety of ways it has been seen throughout its life. It also tends to house those other narrative aesthetics within itself, like the 3 I just mentioned. Also, the tarot is fairly popular. It's not hard to find its influence in other places, especially in anime and video games. But none of them truly take on the ideas of the tarot, they merely wear them like a costume, and I wanted to see if Persona, a game absolutely covered in tarot iconography, reflects those ideas within its themes, characters, and gameplay. Let's get started with the Magician, or the Juggler, or wait, we're not doing the Fool first? Yes, okay, for the sake of keeping a consistent structure, I have decided to skip the Fool and instead discuss it in bits and pieces throughout all of the other major arcana, and then, eventually, we can put all of those pieces together in its own video. I do this because the way the Persona games explore the Fool has a lot of main character energy, obviously. And as such, the full scope of the Fool is a little hard to grasp without first seeing it through the eyes of all the other arcana. So the Magician, also known as the Juggler, is numbered 1 in the tarot deck, the Fool being 0. The card looks like this, or this, or this, or this, or this. Okay, look, there are many different tarot decks out there, all with their unique designs and themes. So our first major question in this analysis is, how do we interpret all of these themes, characters, and gameplay elements through just one deck? We don't, but there are select tarot decks that do pop up a lot in media and Persona specifically. Of course, there is the Rider-Waite deck, the most prominent and well-accepted modern-day version of the tarot. It is probably the one you've seen the most in books or on alt-girls' hydro flasks. Known for their simple color scheme and abundant symbolism, they have drawn a lot of attention and speculation over the years through many different interpretations. The Tarot of Marseille is an Italian-made deck that became popular in France and one of the oldest traditional tarot decks, if I'm not mistaken. And the Thoth deck, which is admittedly more important because of their creator Aleister Crowley than the actual cards themselves. I really do like the art though. It changed some names around and is far more pagan in its imagery compared to Waite's more Christian-style deck. Of the 3, Rider-Waite is certainly the one that Persona 3 is most linked to. It has the most symbolic similarities between the card designs, and they have the same names for each major arcana. It's also a pretty safe bet considering that it is the most popular of all the decks. We have our decks, now we can start the analysis. Well, okay, one last thing, I promise, and then we can get to the kids shooting themselves. Alright, the real complication using the tarot as a narrative aesthetic is that there are several different ways that the tarot is interpreted, and I don't mean like, oh, every interpretation is valid and we all see the world through our lived experience. No, I mean amongst the agreed upon structures, there are like 7 I found in my personal research, which is for sure not all of them. Before we officially jump into the Magician, I will give an incredibly brief and not at all holistic summary of each of these systems I will be cross-referencing with an anime game from 2006. The Jewish Kabbalah, the OG of esotericism. It was a belief system that described the relationship between God, the material world, and you. Oh, also, it looks like this. Remember it? It will be important later. The Hermetic Kabbalah / the Golden Dawn system, where most of the ideas connected the tarot to Jewish mysticism and Christian ideas kind of polymerized into its own thing. They assigned each major arcana to a Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. These little guys. Greek and Egyptian myth. A lot of different mythologies are going to spring up during this series, but the two in particular that are pretty well discussed in the tarot are these ones. Carl Jung, a psychiatrist who had thoughts on the tarot relating to his psychological archetypes. Frankly, more relevant in Persona 4 and 5, but it does come up here on occasion. The Fool's Journey, an idea introduced by Eden Gray. It's not really a real thing, but we'll get to that. It is essentially Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, but every aspect of a story in life can be defined by the major arcana of the tarot laid out in sequential order. Okay, whew. Unfortunately, not all arcana are created equal, and there are some that get more scrutinized than others. That means that not all of the belief systems are going to cover every arcana as much as others. Some have specific focus on arcanas that others essentially skip over. So, at last, the Magician Arcana. Most strongly associated with intelligence, creative power, and magic. This seems to be because of the gods the magician is linked to, like Hermes, Mercury, and Thoth. More obscurely, the magician can be linked to virility, confidence in oneself, and the unification of opposites. Why these things are can be a little complicated, so let's look at the cards themselves. The Mercedes card depicts a rather colorfully dressed man standing at a table covered in trinkets and baubles, carrying a baton in one hand and some sort of circle, most likely a coin, in the other. There is an aspect of presentation to this card. Seemingly, the juggler is selling wares or perhaps putting on some kind of show. The items on his table seem to be a bag, some coins, a knife in its sheath, dice, and 2 cups. To me, I see these as potential vices upon the journey of life. Greed, drink, gambling, violence, or murder, and perhaps the bag is meant to represent the physical form where all of these vices would reside within. Think of it sort of like a Pandora's box situation. The Magician is said to represent beginnings, coming right after the Fool, which is said to represent nothingness, so generously his show is a warning of the treacherous path ahead. Less so generous may be the implication that he is the one responsible for these vices. Not the creator, mind you, but the opener of this Pandora's handbag thing he's got. I also find the fact that he is looking away to be interesting, only due to the fact that both the Persona and the Wait card are looking dead ahead. A lack of eye contact can mean nervousness, untrust, unloyalty, mostly things that imply a level of unknowing and mystery. On one end, this can imply a long journey ahead and the uncertainty that comes with it, or on the other end, it can imply the magician is untrustworthy himself, refusing to make eye contact with those he is fooling. In his right hand, the magician holds a coin similar to the one from his table. Regardless of his role in the vices affecting men, he is not immune to their allure. Lastly, the juggler is holding a baton or some sort of scepter. This is said to be a symbol of magical power, as well as a symbol of guidance. Think of things like parade leaders or even those airport guiding people. The bottom of the card says Le Bateleur, or the bearer of the baton. So add that to the pile of names this arcana goes by. But the baton is linked to Hermes and Mercury, who would bring the will of words to man and god alike. The Mercedes juggler then carries a baton that represents the will of man, which he is thought to mislead or guide with. Next, we have quite a bit of an aesthetic leap between Mercedes magician and Wait's magician. We still have things like the table and the similar wares, though now these look to be more specifically related to the minor arcana, swords, coins, cups, and clubs. The scepter is still held, though now it is raised high in the opposite hand. From there, the similarities end because now our magician is no longer some royal or con man, but a sort of holy person, it seems. This is not only reflected in his clothes, a white robe beneath a bright red cloak, but his posing, a hand pointed to the sky and the other pointed downward. As above, so below. This is a phrase I'm sure most of you have heard in passing, and its meaning is not something so easily parsed. Its origins are a paraphrase from the Emerald Tablet, an old Hermetic text from around the 9th century that was written in Arabic and translated to Latin to roughly mean that which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above. And from this we get the shortened, as above, so below. But okay, what does it mean? Unfortunately, knowing that history does not unveil much of the phrase's true meaning. It has been used in so many different contexts that even the wiki page specifically made for these 4 words acknowledges that it's really up to interpretation. I won't go into it here, but as it becomes more relevant in the analysis, I'll put forth some potential meanings, but generally speaking, it's about opposites. Like the Mercedes card, Waite's card is also outside, though the foliage and plant life is far more prominent in his card, perhaps implying abundance or even power over nature and the material. There is also, peculiarly, an infinity symbol floating above the magician's head. This is actually seen as a reference to the Mercedes card because the hat of the juggler looks like an infinity symbol. Vaguely, I guess it's kinda close. The infinity is frequently connected to cycles, and what is most convenient for our particular situation, life and death. It also links to the number 8 since the infinity symbol and it are the same shape, just rotated 90 degrees. 8 has some different meanings depending on your source. I've generally found it to represent cycles and opposites, which fits the themes we have established already. Another idea that infinity can stand for is power, due to its inherent endlessness. This power supposedly has its roots in the divine, but with more modern interpretations, it could be power linked to anything, really. Power also leads me to think about the magician's red cloak, but it could also represent virility and passion, since those are 2 things associated with the color as well. On to the Thoth deck, and there is an interesting quirk for the Magician of the Thoth deck, this being that there are 3 of them. Luckily, it is fairly agreed upon that only one of the cards was intended to be viewed as the Magician, and it would be this one. So, if we know that, why even bring it up, right? Well, not only does this help clear up some confusion about the deck in general, as I have seen multiple people online wonder why there is and even give meaning to the 3 cards, but some of the theories are somewhat interesting of what this trio could mean. In reality, these other 2 Magus cards were completed by the artist Lady Frida Harris, but Crowley rejected them until they settled on the official one. When printing the 78 card deck on 4 20 card sheets, there were 2 extra spaces left. Most companies producing tarot decks will include instructional cards or perhaps some promotional material for the production company, but for the original Thoth decks, the publisher, A.G. Muller, decided to add 2 extra completed Magus cards, as a treat. This created much confusion on why there were 3 Magus cards, to the point that future copies of the Thoth deck excluded them entirely. So for now, let's just focus on the official, Crowley-approved Magus card. Described by Crowley himself, Mercury is preeminently the bearer of the wand, energy sent forth. This card therefore represents the wisdom, the will, the word, the logos, by whom the worlds were created. And in brief, he is the Son, the manifestation and act of the idea of the Father. 2 important things here. Mercury will come up a couple times, so I feel it is important to explain here that whilst Crowley is equating the Magus to the Roman god Mercury, it is also quite literally thought to be the element Mercury that the Magus can be compared to. This all stems from the idea of Hermetic alchemy, which is a very bloated and convoluted topic, so for the sake of all of our sanities, it is a school of thought comparing aspects of alchemical processes to the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. So, for example, Mercury is said to represent the spirit and vital energy. It represents the dynamism of the universe, being both liquid and metal, so not only is the Magus seen as Mercury, but also Mercury. Speaking of Mercury, the element, not the guy, the symbol for Mercury is created by the Magus himself in the card. The snakes above the Magus are seen as the horns, and the wings on his feet are the arrow, his body making up the rest of the shape. In relation to Mercury, the guy, not the element, we can see the Magus projected upon the caduceus staff, a symbol often attributed to Hermes and, in turn, his Roman counterpart. Now, my second point, I wanted to address Crowley's use of the phrase, he is the Son, the idea of the Father. Whilst familial relationships can come up a lot in the tarot, the father and son described here is meant to be more metaphorical, the father being where the life of the magician came from. To connect to ideas already discussed, the father is the idea or thoughts, and the son is the enacting of those thoughts into the real world. One is the natural evolution of the other, much like how the fool is nothing and the magician becomes something. Back to the card itself. Working from the bottom up, we see what is called the cynocephalus, which is a dog-headed man creature. If you ask me, this actually looks more like a baboon, one of the forms of Thoth, the god of the moon, hieroglyphs, and namesake of the specific deck, but sure, dog, why not? The cynocephalus is also referred to as the ape of Thoth, which means they have very similar roles, regardless of who the card is depicting specifically. Thoth is the inventor of hieroglyphics, so in a way he has the role of parsing the meaning of man's words and putting them to physical form. Quite literally, this is Thoth putting ideas to manifestation. But also, quote, because all falsehood and misunderstanding are inherent in all speech and writing, it is the cosmic duty of the ape of Thoth to constantly mock the work of the magus and distort his words. As Crowley points out, manifestation implies illusion. Wait, what? This is from the book Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot by Lon Milo Duquette, and it's honestly a little confusing. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what Crowley means when saying manifestation implies illusion, as those are pretty opposite ideas, but if I had to guess, it could mean that the manifestation in the material realm inherently makes it illusion because this is not the realm of truth, merely the filter we see it through. Maybe it's that unadulterated knowledge and truth requires no manifestation to understand at all, so any version of this knowledge that doesn't come straight from the source is muddled, which I guess, sure. This is as good a time as any to bring up the fact that the tarot can contradict itself a lot, not just between different interpretations, but within the same one. There are, of course, upright and downward-facing versions of the card, but those typically only apply to when the cards are being used in the practice of divining or fortune-telling. That being said, it has become ubiquitous enough with the tarot in general that I feel like this is a good enough coping mechanism for why the cards seem to contradict themselves a lot. And remember earlier when I talked about the Marseilles juggler as either a guide or deceiver? I guess we can think of the Thoth baboon / cynocephalus as a mini juggler for the magus. He can inscribe his words and will physically, making them easier to understand, or through them as the medium, misconstrue and alter his will to carry a different message than intended. Anyway, moving on, we still have the swords, cups, coins, and scepter, which Crowley deems to be the tools that the magus uses. He creates with the wand, destroys with the sword, preserves with the cup, and redeems with the coin. The Thoth deck introduces 4 more objects to the magician's known items to include paper or papyrus, a torch, an egg with wings, and a style as referred to by Duquette. It's this thing, like a pointy appendage as described by Google. It's supposedly a pen in relation to the papyrus on the right. It can represent what the baboon / cynocephalus already does, the ability to turn thoughts to written word, now within the power of the magus. The torch could be many things. Fire is often associated with the magician, and within the context of the magus, it could apply to the many alchemical processes involving heat and fire, focusing more on fire's ability to change as opposed to create and destroy. The fact that it is a torch is interesting though, because for all of the mystery and deceit we have established with the magician, a torch is the universal symbol for guidance and illumination. Last item on our list is the winged egg, a symbol that carries through to the other cards in the Thoth deck. The wings of the egg are potential for the magician, as the egg is not yet fully formed. You may even argue that the egg shell is not broken, the wings are simply carrying the still incubating fool. The relationship between the fool and the magician can be seen as stages of incubation to birth or first reckoning. A winged egg would seem to imply the process of its hatching and beginning to explore the world and fly above what man can achieve alone. The image itself invokes a lot of interpretations, as it has had many forms in the past. Duquette specifically cites the Orphic egg for its purpose in the Thoth deck. The Orphic egg is a specific version of an idea called the world egg. It is proposed that all of creation started as an egg-like structure, and breaking out from its shell was the universe created. The Orphic egg is directly from Greek myth and was a cosmic body that hatched the primordial being Faunus, who created Kronos, the god of time, Ananke, the god of necessity, and Nyx, the goddess of night. Faunus passed on the role of overseeing godhead to Nyx, who later passed it on to her son Uranos, the god of the heavens. Uranos gave the role to Kronos, who then gave it to his son Zeus, who then retained it. This all comes from the Orphic tradition, which followed the teachings and tellings through the Greek figure and poet Orpheus. Those familiar with Persona 3 are already making the connections, I'm sure. Speaking of, this video is still about Persona, don't worry. The Persona Magician card is frankly very skimpy on details. Stylistically, this is the case for all of the P3 cards, but the Magician is especially bare. Immediately, the only recognizable symbol is the infinity, so the ideas of power and recursion are still there, but after that? Okay, well, out of the gate, the eyes make me think of Waite's card. It also has the Magician looking straight ahead. Connecting to the characterization of the Magician characters and previously discussed patterns, I see this as a strong-headed straightforwardness, Confrontation also comes to mind as the card is meeting eye to eye with the reader, brandishing a flame before them. Also, there is the flame. Generally speaking, I do feel like fire captures a lot of what the magician can represent. Creative power and intelligence, as fire is the first major step for mankind's evolution, creation, destruction, and change of course is mentioned, and as a tool to light the way. I actually feel like this particular idea stands out more than the others. The fire in the persona card has a lighter blue aura around it. This could be mystical energy or the light it emits, or it could be both. The light unfurls the deeper blue darkness, revealing eyes and hands. I like this idea because it strongly ties back to the magician as a guide or deceiver. Being the only light in the darkness gives him a lot of power over whomever he may be looking at, i.e. the reader of the card. The hands are a little annoying because at first, the 4 fingers on each hand immediately made me think of the connection between 8 and infinity. With infinity at the top and the 8 fingers at the bottom, it invokes the idea of as above, so below. The all-divine and powerful infinity at the top and the 8, composed of the physical, the body, represents the relative below. Hell, even the 8 represented by 2 sets of 4 is interesting, as 4 is seen as the number of matter, as in the material world. Combining the two, which has been a theme of the magician, creates the symbol physically similar to the spiritual infinity. It all works really well in a subtle way that holds a lot of meaning from the previous versions of the card. So, what's the problem? Zoom in, enhance. Yep, right at the very tippy tip of the bottom of the border are these 2 little bumps that are most certainly thumbs. Look, I know it's stupid to harp on, but I was looking for anything on this card. Just a crumb of symbolism, a small morsel of meaning, and I really loved this idea. I thought it was really clever, and the rest of what I've said so far still feels valid, don't get me wrong, but they aren't as directly connected as the Infinity and 8 are. The other elements of the card are just not as cohesive, is what I'm trying to say. It's obvious that the art was made first and the border was added later on, otherwise why even add thumb bumps? You can also see at the bottom corner of the lip, where the eye symbol is, what seem to be the cuffs of sleeves, which doesn't tell us much other than the fact this is probably meant to be a human being instead of floating eyes and hands. I'm not sure if a borderless version of this art exists anywhere. I mean, it must for how I assume this card was constructed, art then border on top. A cursory search online hasn't gotten me anything, so, you know, not the end of the world, but still kind of frustrating. Last thing I wanted to talk about with the Persona card is the colors. Since the details of the Persona cards are so sparse, the choice of colors would be something that could be worth latching onto. So, okay, the Magician card has got blue and blue, that's it, awesome, great. Well, blue is associated with calm, serenity, the ocean, wisdom, loyalty, royalty, and integrity. And none of these really line up with the Magician except wisdom, of course. The blue could be masculinity, since the 2 sides of the Tree of Life represent masculine and feminine aspects of God, and the Magician is the first path on the masculine side. Blue is often associated with men, specifically young boys, so if you wanted my deeper, more thematic take, I guess I'd go with that, or maybe the wisdom symbolism. But if you wanted my more realistic take, I think the color choice is one of convenience. If we were to presume that the fire is a light in the darkness, how does one represent darkness in color? Black can't be used since the line art is black, and shades of gray would make everything look really muted. So the solution? Make it blue! Not only is blue a color used to represent depth and obstruction, it is also Persona 3's main color. This makes blue kind of the default color of just space or absence of detail. So with all that we've learned from the cards, we can finally start talking about the video game. So let's talk about it. Junpei Iori, slacker, bullheaded, perverse, self-aware, silly, and kind-hearted. Persona, Hermes, messenger of the gods, and protector of merchants, thieves, and travelers. Heart of seas, and ace detective. And I do really mean that when I say heart. Amongst a cast of largely depressed people, Junpei stands out for his upbeat and devil-may-care attitude. The game tells us this from the moment we meet him. Junpei first talks to us after class in a very familiar and casual way. He says,
I transferred here when I was in 8th grade. I know how tough it is being the new kid. So wanted to say, hey, see what a nice guy I am?
Immediately giving us a peek at his kind nature. He approaches you as someone who knows what you're going through and is sympathetic to that experience. When Yukari is introduced to the conversation, she says,
At it again, huh? I swear you'll talk to anyone if they'll listen.
Now, Junpei can be a bit annoying. It's kind of one of his character traits, but the fact that his first action in the whole game is him checking if we are okay hints at Junpei being a generally friendly guy to most people, contrasting with the rest of the cast we've met so far. When we first meet Yukari, Mitsuru, and Akihiko, hell, even Fuka, Shinjiro, and Ken, it is under the circumstances of danger, business, or both. The only other characters we meet so casually are Aigis, which I feel is telling of her great importance to the story, or Koromaru, which is telling of the fact that he's a dog we found on the sidewalk. So Junpei is a nice guy, but he also goes through a lot in Persona 3. He's frankly a focal point for a lot of the game's events, and as much as I'd love to get into all that right now, I feel like it would better serve this video to learn more about the core of Junpei first, before we get to the part where I start spoiling the plot of a game that comes out a month ago. For that, we're gonna have to jump canon. So, in Persona 3, you have social links. It's the first game in the franchise to introduce them. You hang out with friends and acquaintances after school and on weekends. You get to know them and their problems, and you help solve them and maybe have sex, you know, if they're a girl. Naturally, you would be led to believe that every member of the party has a social link. That would make sense, right? Well, no. And to be fair, we do learn a lot about Cease from the main story. Them not having any social links makes sense, in a way. Well, the female members of Cease have social links, but the boys are left woefully friendless. Wait, but why? Why would they do that? That just seems so arbitrary and lazy and... Oh... That's why they did it. So if we want to get on some boy lovin', or literally any sort of relationship at all with the lads of Cease, we're gonna have to take a visit to Persona 3 Portable. You can play as a girl in this one, which means boys are cute, and now we can talk to them. Okay? Problem solved. Junpei will be your Magician Arcana social link as the Femc, who I'll be referring to as Kotone in Persona 3 Portable, replacing Kenji from the original game. His social link largely revolves around Junpei's relationship with his self-worth and his father, with a backdrop of someone taking pics of Kotone in her gym uniform. I won't walk you through the whole story rank by rank, but I do want to look at the ideas from this social link to further understand Junpei's character. Ranks 1 through 3 mainly focus on the gym pervert stuff, so we're just gonna jump ahead. In the 4th rank, Junpei and Kotone see a drunk man wandering around in broad daylight. Junpei is disgusted by this and reveals it is because his dad is an abusive drunk. He specifically discusses how what were once painful beatings as a child have become the pathetic strugglings of a weakening and aging old man. Junpei obviously doesn't miss being beaten, but the constant reminder of death and time from somebody who doesn't respect or utilize either of those things is disquieting. To me, it is somewhat implied that Junpei doesn't fight back because his father is already so pathetic, that retaliation would make him feel like the bad guy. It is such a specific feeling and experience that Junpei describes, and it unveils a whole lot about him in just a few boxes of text. Junpei's disgust for drunkards informs us that his feelings about his father are largely negative, but the way that he describes his father's deteriorating is far more complex than simple hatred. That is still his father. That is someone he feels as though he should care about, even love, but doesn't, and fairly so. Though there is an aspect of pity, or maybe shame. It's beautiful because, of course, Junpei doesn't say he pities his father explicitly, but the word choice gets us thinking that there must be something more than pure spite. It's a cocktail of messy feelings that informs us how Junpei feels about himself, for sure. Surrounded by people who excel at what they do, he is the odd man out. He has to struggle for affection and adoration because he doesn't get it on the merits of class, intellect, or beauty like his classmates do. That isn't to say that the other characters don't deserve the respect and love they get, or that they don't also struggle, but Junpei's struggle specifically makes him feel a connection with his father. He sees himself as unrespectable or like a failure, which is probably not dissimilar to how he may see his dad. Other revealing lines such as referring to the drunk at the beginning, and unearth even more. Junpei does seem far happier living at the dorms than at home, and one of the responses to this line of dialogue is, "That's not true," to which Junpei apologizes, saying that you must have had good parents, and then apologizes once more. To me, this exchange feels so heart-wrenching. Like, his comment about Kotone's parents can be read as genuine, but his second apology kinda makes me feel like there was some venom behind his words. Like he was saying, well, if you think that way, you must have had good parents. His second apology is in regards to this implication, as well as remembering that Katone's parents are dead. I don't know if this was all intentional, but goddamn does that hit me hard. This rank establishes the core of all of Junpei's motivations, to not be like his father. What is great about this is I feel that Junpei's worry is realistic. Junpei is a slacker. He does often give in to his vices instead of working. He is his father's son. When it is revealed that ending the Dark Hour will also get rid of his persona, this social link makes his reaction make more sense. Him grappling with the loss of what he feels makes him finally special, separate from his father, goes from understandable to heartbreaking. In turn, Junpei's triumphs in progress feel all the more rewarding knowing this about him. Fast forwarding over to rank 7, Junpei confides in Katone that he feels like his life is directionless and that, even with the persona stuff, he doesn't know what he'll be doing with his life in the next 10 years. He can't enjoy his hobbies because he feels as though he could be spending his time better, which goddamn I feel that. He wants to have a personal mission, something that only he can do. Junpei feels like he has to be special because if he isn't, how can he know for certain that he is valuable as a person, which goddamn I feel that! I think it is also interesting that this conversation about the future started in reference to eating and health. Intentional or not, it brings me back to Junpei's father and his not so great condition. This throughline makes Junpei's worries feel more realized, like they all come from the same person and aren't just appearing out of nowhere. Twice in this rank, Junpei seems happy to know that you are also thinking about these existential ideas. This eases his isolation, knowing that even though he thinks you are much better than him, you can still connect on that. Knowing that this idea isn't only in his head gives him control over his feelings, disconnecting them from his father. It's a reach for certain. The conversation doesn't really center around health or food, but I feel like it makes sense. So whilst this rank isn't as dense as rank 4, it settles as a nice midpoint between what was established in 4 and what the resolution will be. I just really enjoy this conversation with Junpei. It encapsulates those deeper talks you have with your friends late at night. I also like the implication that he appreciates the back and forth between him and Yukari. When you tell him that his terrible jokes are one of the things that only he can do, he describes how Yukari will shit on him for making them, but then laughs to himself. Junpei does usually see the best in the people around him, and this little bite of dialogue recognizes that. Junpei ends his rank by saying, it's a nice line showing Junpei's growing maturity, whilst exposing his jokey personality partially as an aversion to serious topics like this. In the very next rank, Junpei and Katone are in the library. Junpei has decided that it's finally time to figure out all this math stuff. After putting his nose to the grind and working on it, he seems to pick it up and complete his homework. Afterwards, Junpei discusses how he thinks that even if he never uses the knowledge he gained today, that he feels it is important regardless. He says that the most important thing is putting the time you have to good use, even if it is on superfluous things. Doing things that don't satisfy him are not good uses of his time. He specifies that doing things that feel good in the moment isn't a bad thing, but if it does nothing for you or becomes something you no longer care for, you shouldn't do it because your time is precious. Junpei is anxious but hopeful, saying that even if he doesn't know what his purpose is now, he feels like he'll find it someday. He feels this way because he is so motivated by his friends who excel at what they do, which, okay, I'm sure almost all of you are familiar with the trope, the power of friendship. Basically, it's what it says in the tin. Your friends give you power. Sometimes this is an unbreakable will to do what needs to be done because you can't let them down. And sometimes it's straight up literal power you get from having friends. Much of media that use it often don't really delve into how the friendships make them stronger or better specifically. Having friends is nice, and you like your friends, so when they are in danger, you'll protect them at all costs. And that is great and all, and I'm sure we feel like we could relate if we were in the scenario where we had to protect them, but what Junpei feels here is more specific and grounded. Being inspired by your friends is such a real experience. Wanting to be better because someone who cares and believes in you can do great things themselves will naturally inspire you to chase after greatness as well. Junpei felt lesser than everybody in C's, but now him wanting to catch up and really put in the work means that he's on the way to correcting that mistaken perception. The power he gains is his ability to change because others helped him, but that power is still uniquely his. Only he can change himself, no one else made him do it. It's a story that centers on Junpei being an individual and having the power to change, which is why he is the magician. In the concept art for Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, Junpei is shown to be a part of Mitsuru's new execution squad, and he has a much more traditional badass design with this long coat and massive katana. But of course, the version we get is the baseball coach, and I'm so glad we did. I bring this up here because this moment of Junpei wanting to catch up to his friends is Junpei specific, not just a generic lesson. Him wanting to figure out who he is and putting in the work to do so shouldn't compromise his character. Who we see in P4AU should feel like Junpei, and it does. The path of least resistance, narratively speaking, would have been putting him in the new execution squad. To me, that would defeat the purpose of his arc, to find something that only he can do. Him finding worth outside of his ability to hit stuff hard and use a persona. I'm glad Junpei found his thing that feels uniquely him, even if it isn't glamorous. Plus, he still has aspirations beyond coaching baseball. He wants to be a baseball star and marry his girlfriend, who we'll get to, don't worry. The rest of the social link is far from unremarkable, but I won't be talking about it here. Ranks 9 and 10 are superb wrap-ups for Junpei, 9 especially, and the rest of the ranks display a friendship between a man and a woman that feels genuine and mature. For 2009 writing in a game where the mechanics are very heterosexual, it feels really good to see two characters be friends without treating Kotone as just another one of the guys. If you want to see what I'm talking about, go look it up, or better yet, play the game. It's out on something you certainly have for only $20, and its content confirmed not to be in the remake. Back to content that is in the remake, we see the beginning of Junpei's arc officially. On the 9th of May, there is a full moon, and a large shadow is detected near the monorail station. The party meets up in the control room at the dorms, and Minato is made leader once again. Junpei becomes upset by this, but brushes it off, saying that we are stuck in the leader role and how it sucks to be you. In the different versions of this moment across the manga, movie, and Persona 3 Portable, Junpei does have slightly different reactions to this. In the manga, Junpei says how it must be nice being so amazing. In the movie, he says the protagonist isn't really the leader type. And in Portable, if you're playing as Kotone, Junpei says,
Guess it's pretty much decided that you're our leader, huh? Even when I'm the only guy in the group.
Referring to the fact that in this version of events, it's just him, Yukari, and Kotone. The movie and the manga dive more into Junpei's jealousy of the main character. In the original game/FES, Junpei's beef is less so with Minato specifically, and more rather that he wants to be the leader because he wants to be respected, to separate himself from the others as unique. Within the manga, and especially the movie, Junpei's anger is directed at somebody who he perceives to be better than him, exposing his own insecurities. Of course, Minato doesn't do this intentionally. Junpei is taking somebody in his circle fulfilling his desired role as a threat to his self-worth. The movie even has Junpei break down at one point, screaming, "I'm just as good as him." I think this also relates a lot to Minato, or Makoto Yuki's characterization in the movie specifically. He's colder, more reserved, almost emotionless. This against Junpei's raucous personality creates an even greater contrast between the two, making this moment work better at highlighting Junpei's jealousy. When Junpei says Minato isn't the leader type, he's imagining someone charismatic and overtly heroic to take the charge. Someone he wishes to be. In Portable, well, yeah, not Junpei's greatest moment. Here, Junpei feels like he should be the leader by default as the only man in the group. I could sit here and discuss how this feeds into his idea of an exceptional person being male-oriented since he based his views on being separate from his father, but that's a lot of credit to give to a kind of out-of-character line, especially this version of Junpei. Luckily, Mitsuru sets him straight, to which Junpei immediately backtracks, which did get a chuckle out of me. Honestly, more of a Mitsuru moment than a Junpei one now that I think about it. Once Minato, Yukari, and Junpei begin to investigate, Junpei chases after a shadow alone into the next train cart. Once he does, the whole monorail begins moving. At the end of the track is another train, which means the party is currently on a collision course with certain doom. Within these next couple of minutes, Minato and Ko need to reunite with Junpei, defeat the full moon shadow, and stop the train from crashing, all while fending off all the other shadows attacking them. A major theme of this full moon encounter is maintaining a cool head and making important decisions in high-stress scenarios. These themes largely tie into many elements of the priestess, but also of course slot into the magician as well. Junpei is the inverse or black magician here, using his powers for self-indulgence, putting his team, one he wanted to lead, in danger. The magician is known for enacting his will into the world, but if that will forsakes others, then you may become lost or punished. Here, Junpei's one-track mind, when focused on a selfish desire, almost cost him his life. The shadow also leads Junpei away from his group, leaving both them and him in a less advantageous position. The negative aspects of the magician are not only appearing in Junpei, but in the world around him as he is misguided, much like how the Mercedes card describes the potential magician. In combination with Junpei's blind fervor for defeating the shadows, it reminds me of the Persona Magician card, specifically as it being a light in the darkness. Junpei's pursuit happens under the assumption that the shadow he spots is the one they are looking for. He's lured in by not wanting to miss the opportunity to save the day. As the only shadow in the vicinity, in tandem with Junpei's desire to prove himself, he tunnel visions into a scenario which he is unprepared for, not unlike following the only source of light in a dark room. This moth to a flame moment is what proves that Junpei is not ready to be a leader. Not only does he fail to keep his team safe, but he lets his desire overtake logic, something his enemy was accounting for. That, of course, isn't to say that this part of Junpei is inherently bad. Junpei's straightforwardness is often a boon to Seize and his friends post this moment, and his being manipulated here can be attributed to his naive nature, but this aspect of him also lets him be trusting to others, though maybe at times when he shouldn't be. After all, this isn't the last time he's led astray. Junpei and Chidori. This is a beloved relationship amongst Persona 3 fans, and for good reason. It highlights Junpei's character growth by giving him a meaningful spot in the story that feels like only he could fill. The relationship between Junpei and Chidori shows us parts of Junpei that were always there, of course, like his sociable personality and caring nature, but now that he has matured more, we can also see previously negative aspects of his character in a more positive light. During the first full moon operation, Junpei lets his bullheadedness take control and nearly gets himself killed. In the case of his relationship with Chidori, his single-mindedness breaks through the droll outlook she has. Their first real conversation happens during their third meeting, in which Junpei notices a very nasty cut on her hand. As he tries to help her, Chidori wonders why Junpei cares so much, but invites him to meet up with her again. Chidori later confides in Junpei that she feels like she doesn't know herself very well, a point which Junpei connects deeply to. It's also here where Junpei tells Chidori about the Dark Hour. She compliments Junpei in doing all of this life-threatening work for people who will never give him any recognition. What really sells the connection here is that Junpei describes his time with Seize as him being the hero, but Chidori, who already knew about the Dark Hour, can see through the bravado for what Junpei and Co are really doing, and despite their conflicting beliefs, finds charm in his unrelenting positivity. As the two continue to grow and circumstances become more dire, Junpei begins to doubt whether he should continue seeing Chidori, but Minato tells him to return to her anyway, and it is clearly this stay true to himself, unflinching desire to help Chidori that saves her life. Even if Minato has to push Junpei to go, he always wants to, he just doesn't know if it's right. As the leader, Minato helps Junpei be who he always has been, because that is how he saved Chidori the first time, saved her from her self-destructive lifestyle. The magician doesn't spend much time focusing on relationships explicitly, only making comparisons to pre-existing figures, mainly Adam and Eve. The magician is seen as Adam, largely in his role as the first man, the magician coming right after the fool being nothingness and all of that. Junpei, of course, is one of the first party members of the game and your first real friend. He is also the first character to get a focused arc during the monorail segment. This is to say that Junpei encompasses a lot of firsts. Adam is also characterized as foolish and rash, but not maliciously so, much like Junpei. So if Junpei is Adam, that would naturally make Chidori Eve, and frankly, the comparison isn't as strong, I think. Chidori is Eve as far as the relationship between her and Junpei makes her. That is to say, this comparison is more weighted towards Junpei than Chidori. So Adam was the first gardener meant to tend to the land of Eden, but also within the tarot, the idea of the unconscious mind of the female. In this way, Eve can be seen as said garden. This is due to the two sides of the tree of life being split between male and female, one of the traits associated with them being the male conscious and the female unconscious. Junpei waters Chidori's unconscious mind with his continued visits and company, allowing her to flourish. Do I feel this was all intentional? Well, maybe. Not so much that I believe the writers were directly making Junpei out to be Adam, the tender to Chidori or Eve's unconscious mind, but more that the continuous themes of the magician line up well with the historical examples we see in the magician thus far. But think of this. What brings Chidori back to life? The flowers. These flowers she filled with life energy only when Junpei came to visit. Junpei is then, more literally, a gardener. Though one could also argue that whilst Adam was the first gardener, he was also a failure because, well, you know, the true gardener of mankind is pretty much considered to be Jesus Christ. Luckily, Persona 3 doesn't have a Jesus analog, or that would really throw a wrench into this whole analysis, huh? Look, am I going to say that Chidori's arc largely revolves around her choosing between two people who represent similar biblical figures, one being known for failure and the other leading her astray by taking the form of that original figure's better and more influential version, culminating in her choosing her love and being punished for it, not because it was wrong, but because for life to have meaning she must die, and this is her finally realizing that? No, not here. Wait for the Hanged Man video. One thing I can definitely say that these two represent with the Magician iconography is the unification of opposites, or as above, so below. It's not hard to see, right? Excitable man-child and gloomy goth girly? Wait, when did this game come out? Damn, Atlas, very ahead of your time. Anyway, yeah, they're very different people, and their unification creates a greater, more complete life, and honestly, you could see it a bunch of different ways. Obviously, Junpei is bright, happy, and divine, and she is the lost demon. Junpei is man, and Chidori is lower, brought back to humanity. Junpei is man, and Chidori is the divine, if we want to make allusions to Screga as divine enforcer types. And most obviously, the formation of Trismegistus comes from the unification of Medea and Hermes, which is actually very interesting, because Junpei goes through a literal resurrection in this process. Chidori sacrifices herself to bring Junpei's body back to life, a combination of two to make a third, more divine aspect. This is actually reflected in his Persona 4 Arena Ultimax design, specifically his necklace. Before, he wore this square piece with 4 studs, rivets, I don't know what they're supposed to be. In P4AU, he wears a dagger necklace gifted to him by Chidori, but the way it is oriented makes it look like a cross, symbolizing the divine nature of his resurrection through Chidori. The number 4 also represents matter, solidity, and the material in the tarot, so perhaps this 4-sided necklace with 4 little designs becoming a classic representation of not just the divine, but resurrection, is more meaningful than I thought. I doubt it's intentional from a design standpoint, but it is rather neat to think about. So that's Junpei wrapped up. We'll be making visits back to him occasionally throughout this video, especially when we're talking about the personas. By the way, the personas. When I see people talk about Persona 3 and its showcase of the different arcanas, I feel as though the personas themselves are largely ignored. Well, the main party members' personas get a lot of attention, which of course I will talk about, but I'm referring to the miscellaneous personas that the main character can access through his wildcard ability. All personas have an arcana attached to them, and for this series, I'd like to take a look at them all through the lens of what we have established the specific arcana to represent, and see if they line up and potentially give us more insight into said arcana. For the Magician, we have Hermes and Trismegistus, Nekomata, Jack Frost, Pyrojack, Huapo, Sati, Oribus, Rongda, and the Ultimate Magician persona, Cert. Now, I won't be covering every one of these personas individually here, and will just be highlighting the ones I find particularly resonant with the Magician, as well as the ones I think are really interesting. So, that being said, Jack Frost. A mythical figure of cold, winter, and snow who may have had many incarnations across different cultures. Supposedly, the farthest back of any mention of a Jack Frost-like figure was from Anglo-Saxon and Norse cultures. The Finnish have a version called Pakasuko, and Sweden has King Bor, Germany has Mrs. Hall, and Russia has Grandfather Frost. The name Jack Frost seems to be English in origin, and its first appearance in literature comes from Roundabout Our Coalfire or Christmas Entertainment, a popular Christmas-related book from 1734. Quote, this time of year being cold and frosty, generally speaking, or when Jack Frost commonly takes us by the nose, the diversions are within doors, either in exercise or by fireside. I'm no historian, so I can't say for certain, but I have some sources claiming that Jack Frost is less of a real deity and more of a turn of phrase. Despite being connected to gods or different mythical figures, it seems far more likely that Jack Frost is simply the personification of winter or the coming cold. That being said, this personification still largely lines up with how more mythical interpretations describe him, a small fairy-like creature who is responsible for the changing of the seasons. He paints the leaves from green to warmer yellows, oranges, and reds in the fall, and frosts your windows and nips at your nose in the wintertime. In a lot of media, Jack Frost is mischievous and could either be a well-meaning prankster or a malicious trickster. This lines up well with the magician archetype, specifically the whole idea of the black magician or huckster. The implication that the powers of Jack Frost may be used for good or evil is baked in. The magician also often links itself with reincarnation, as shown by the infinity symbol in most of the cards. Reincarnation, more often than not, requires someone to be dead first before coming back as something new. Jack Frost, as the personification of winter, has the job of bringing the land to death before it becomes reincarnated as spring. Fire, while standing for destruction, is also seen as the root of creation, technology, and innovation. Ice and snow, being heavily associated with the time of year where things die a lot, doesn't really have the same layers that we see in fire. Life is complicated, death is simple, at least in their mechanics. Jack Frost implies much of how we view winter as a force and as a character. Jack Frost, as the only representative of the cold, shows the necessary steps to be taken for something to change, that at some point the original has to die. How fitting for the current state of Persona. Sati. Now, before I explain the history, I wanted to mention that Hinduism doesn't have an exact timeline for how the events of Sati's life play out, so it is likely that my interpretation will differ from many others, but regardless, here's how I've put it together in my head. Sati was a reincarnation of the goddess Uma, an aspect of Parvati. As a child, Sati followed the teachings of Shiva, which caught his attention. Shiva asked for Sati to be his consort / for her hand in marriage, and Sati accepts. Sati's father, Daksha, did not approve of the wedding, and in revolt, Sati threw herself onto the pyre, burning to death. This obviously upset Shiva, and this ended up causing a lot of problems in nature. Then Vishnu, preserver of the universe, eventually steps in to calm Shiva and restores Sati into Parvati. Living an ascetic lifestyle like Shiva, Parvati eventually won him over and they were married. Parvati is the symbol of love, power, and gentleness. She is the originator of the dance style of Lasya, a style involving great flexibility and grace. This contrasts with Shiva's Tendava, a dance of destruction. Sati calls to mind the magician representing birth after incubation as the Fool, since Sati is the reincarnation of Uma. After self-immolation, Sati eventually returns as Parvati, who was assigned the Priestess Arcana in Persona 3. Not only is the Priestess the next Arcana down the road on the Fool's journey, but on the Tree of Life, both the Magician and the Priestess's paths start from the Sephiroth of the Supreme Crown Kether. This could mean that no matter their incarnation, Sati is always destined for godhood in some manner. It just depends on the path she takes. The Magician leads her to Bina, the realm of understanding, a place of potential. Perhaps the understanding of Sati is what tempers Shiva, and after her death, he is driven into a rage. It also being a realm of potential possibly foreshadows her further evolution into Parvati. When Sati returns as Parvati on the path of the Priestess, we now see Tiferet, the realm of beauty. This represents the highest state of mind a non-divine consciousness can reach. To me, this is Parvati adopting the life of the ascetic, reaching the highest levels of human consciousness to attract Shiva. Even those of you with a passing knowledge of Hinduism probably know that reincarnation is a large part of the faith, and for Sati to represent this as well as Fire's ability to destroy and recreate makes her a near-perfect magician persona. Huapo. A Chinese fairy / tree spirit that is created once the souls of 3 or more people who are hung from the same tree coalesce. They are described to have pale white skin and sound like songbirds. They are about an inch tall and wear no clothes. Clearly, her design in the SMT series takes some liberties. A clothed, red-skinned, non-hairless woman is how we see Huapo here, and the reason for this has never been super clear to me. I've seen it said that the red skin and gold hair represent the Chinese flag, and I don't know, it seems like a weird design choice for a series that is usually pretty faithful to the little descriptions we have of our demons. The original story of Huapo is titled The Flower Girl. It's about a man who is lured to her by the sound of birdsong and how he takes care of her after taking her in. She eventually dies because the man forgets to water her. There is a tragedy implied that if only Huapo could speak to let him know this wouldn't have happened. In the game, Huapo continues the magician fire theme whilst being weak to ice. The weakness to ice makes sense as her death was due to a lack of water, and ice is the closest thing we have to that in P3. The fire affinity I find odd though. Within Huapo's lore, fire doesn't ever become particularly relevant. It kind of feels like they made the design first and saw she was red and thought red equals fire and sort of settled for that. Sure, Rangda also doesn't have any explicit connections to fire, but they're connected to Durga, a goddess of war and destruction, among other more positive things. Frankly speaking, there isn't a lot here that signals to the traditional magician archetypes, and that's why I wanted to talk about Huapo. You see, in Persona 3 FES, they added new personas, and from what I can tell considering Huapo, there wasn't a lot of consideration for how they fit into their respective arcanas thematically. Mechanically, Huapo still fits in fine, but that seemed to be Atlus's only focus for the new personas. Going forward, I'm curious whether or not this was a fluke or if all of the FES inclusions kind of stick out. Or maybe Atlas knows something about Huopo that I don't, because it was only until P5 where her Arcana was changed to the Hanged Man. A far more fitting placement, I'd say. Cert. The fiery giant, guardian of Muspelheim and bringer of Ragnarok from Norse mythology. Bringer of Ragnarok, the equivalent of the Norse apocalypse, may sound antagonistic, perhaps even evil, but in reality Cert is brave and patient, doing what has to be done for the sake of the new world. Once Ragnarok concludes, it's said that what remains will become a better and stronger world, with the new gods taking the place of the old ones and 2 humans left to repopulate the earth. And yes, this is a very Christianized version of the events of the story, but tragically, it's kind of all we have and has become kind of the canon outcome for the Norse myth. From this perspective, Cert is performing a necessary evil for the sake of all humanity. He does this with his burning sword of doom, as I've seen it referred to as. It's not entirely agreed upon, but Cert's flaming sword may be one and the same with Levitain, a sword, wand, dart thing created by Loki. For this analysis, I will say that this is the case, as when creating a weapon from Cert through Persona Weapon Fusion, it creates Levitain. I like this, since Loki is one of the previous Arcana's strongest personas. It follows the themes of rebirth and passing on from the Fool into the Magician within the mechanics of the game. Also, Levitain being a wand or dart works into the design of most Magician cards carrying a wand or scepter. A wand may also be seen as a sort of baton, but that is kind of a stretch. I only bring this up because of Cert's role as the signaler of destruction, and a baton is a tool used for signaling. Speaking of, Cert signaling the destruction of the world for a greater purpose plays into how the magician can be good or evil, though this is more a matter of perspective as opposed to actually being one or the other. Some see his actions as something that must be stopped, while others know that it must be done despite the havoc his actions bring. Cert's bringing of Ragnarok to mankind unites the world of man and god, as everyone is caught in the crossfires of war. This once again rings of the uniting, or perhaps more fittingly, the collision of opposites, as above, so below. Considering Cert's role in the grand scheme, even if this meeting is violent, it ultimately leaves us with a greater whole, a familiar direction we have already seen in the Magician. The Magician's number 1 reminds me of Cert's patience and resolution to bring about Ragnarok, recalling the meaning of the number to represent wholeness and single-minded determination. It is said that this mindset will bring the Magician to great heights, and with the outcome of Ragnarok in mind, I feel like this applies to Cert fairly well. Compared to the many tricksters and revenge seekers in this Arcana, Cert stands out for his more noble nature, doing what must be done no matter the consequences. I think that makes him a really fitting capstone for this Arcana, since much of the Magician is shown to be about the young, learning, and maturing. Following Junpei's arc, we see him come to accept that he must do what is right and end the Dark Hour despite what it may mean for him and his power. Side note, I really appreciate that the completion of the Magician Arcana gives you access to a weapon that allows Junpei to more effectively use his fire attribute. Levitain's default damage type is fire instead of slashing. Since all basic attack damage is calculated by strength, this allows Junpei to utilize his large physical stat in tandem with his persona's main element. And you know, while we're talking about the guy, we may as well talk about his persona. Hermes is a free spirit and known trickster. He is associated with literature and poetry, connecting back to the power of creation and imagination the magician is linked to. He is also a god of commerce, thieves, and liars, which nicely clicks into place of the magician as a conman, merchant, or huckster. Intellect is also heavily associated with magicians, and to Hermes, a messenger god, this makes sense. He holds and delivers news from far away to mortals and gods alike, and while Hermes is never stated to be dumb by any means, his true intelligence lies in him being privy to the movings and shakings of the world. Also, Hermes is known to be an inventor of many things. He is the inventor of the lyre, the famed instrument of Orpheus. Hermes' invention gives a method of expression to Orpheus, and as such, Junpei's raucous and goofy personality brings a form of expression to Minato's life. Continuing the trend of inter-party persona relationships, Hermes saves Io after her capture by Argus, though what this may symbolize about Junpei and Yukari's relationship, if anything at all, is lost on me. Hermes is also considered to be a guide of the dead, which ties in well with the game's themes. The Caduceus was said to be a staff that wakes the sleeping, sleeps the waking, and grant peaceful deaths, all relevant once again to the iconography and themes of Persona 3. If you know, you know. Hermes was one of the most commonly worshipped gods, as he represented many different people. Junpei himself is very much the everyman of seas, as I've discussed, but outside of the game, Junpei is just really well liked by the fans. Not really an academic point, but it's cute, and I think it works. Design-wise, I find Hermes' wings to be quite interesting. They are, in a sense, ineffective, attached to his arms and legs, linked between things that connect us with the Earth, and yet he flies anyway. Well, all the personas fly, technically, I guess, but his attack animations have him soaring into his target to strike, so I'm counting it. Regardless, his ability to fly demonstrates his combination of man and god is what makes him divine. His ability to quickly travel between mortal and godly realms are bound to frequent symbols of matter and earth, the hands and feet. And for the record, I don't mean to imply that Hermes the god is part human, but that Hermes the persona represents the divine through his godly power of flight being attached to common symbols of matter, and this idea will make more sense once we get to Trismegistus. Hermes' color scheme tells a simple but an effective story. These golden wings of grandeur and helmet symbolic for his namesake frame a body cloaked in a muted, depressing black, symbolizing the sadness Junpei carries beneath all his bravado. The helmet itself is a very knightly visor. Through this we can see Junpei's desire to be a hero, like a knight who bravely charges into battle. Through his development, the helmet evolves to invoke a knight's protection, the reason why he charges into battle. I may also just be seeing what I want to here, because I can also see Hermes in a kind of Kamen Rider Super Sentai kind of vibe, as I've seen others online say. Regardless, both invoke this juvenile idea of a hero who is known to save others through action and violence. Thinking on heroes, Hermes is known for helping a lot of heroes in his time. In many of the Greek stories he appeared, Hermes would assist journeying heroes such as Perseus, Orestes, and most notably, Odysseus during the events of the Odyssey. In this way, Hermes encapsulates the Marseilles card in a very unique way. More often than not, the way he helps heroes is through giving them the power of some sort of trickery, like making them invisible. He guides through teaching others of deception, encompassing both halves of the conversation about the juggler's true intentions. And whilst Junpei's strength never really comes from those things, except for maybe in a few choice instances, I like to think that Junpei's desire to be a hero and him being paired with Hermes, a guiding god for heroes, led him down the proper path. One could also interpret this as Junpei inhabiting the role as a guide for other heroes like Hermes himself. Perhaps not so much in the base story of Persona 3, but in the answer, he seems to be one of the few members of SEAS who has his head on straight and maintain the lesson learned from the journey. On top of that, in Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, he becomes a Little League coach. Maybe not a guide for heroes, but this becomes much more interesting when you consider that Hermes, god of the messengers, is also the god of athletes. So through Hermes as the magician, Junpei becomes a man who is guided by his experience as a member of SEAS and a Persona user. He becomes someone who learns enough about himself and what he wants in life to guide others, to keep them on the proper path. Not unlike the god who started him down this path in the first place. Trismegistus. Trismegistus shines a bright, burning red, adorned with new white accents symbolizing the life sacrificed by Chidori for Junpei, forever weaved into his soul and psyche. The color red has many connotations involving change, blood, and revelation, fitting well into the world of alchemy Trismegistus is known for. The red also continues to mean life, passion, and fury, which, considering the circumstances of Trismegistus' formation, yeah, that's fair. His head has changed to be more bird-like, referencing the cultural combination of Hermes and Thoth, Thoth having the head of an ibis. Trismegistus carries in his beak the Philosopher's Stone, a heavily sought-after artifact by alchemists of which Trismegistus was very famous for being. The Bird of Hermes was an alchemical process described in the Ripley Scroll, where powerful vapors from the Philosopher's Stone are emitted. This process is said to represent regeneration and perhaps even resurrection, further linking Junpei's new persona and the moment of its creation. Okay, that's all well and good, but who is Trismegistus? We've heard the name Hermes plenty of times, and Thoth has come up before, but this name is brand new. To make the history a little less confusing, Thoth and Hermes were worshipped in the same place, this place, and were often linked together through interpretatio Graeca, which is the process of adopting foreign gods into separate pantheons to make sense of the world as a whole. Basically, this was to prevent different religions from stepping on each other's toes by saying, oh, that god is just our god but with a different name. In this instance, Hermes and Thoth were considered to be the same, if not very similar. This is largely thought to be where Hermes picked up the epithets such as god of intelligence and learning, from his close association with Thoth. Through religious syncretism, very simply put, it's when two religious beliefs combine together, the figure Trismegistus was born through the combination of Hermes and Thoth. This is the meta, real-world explanation for what happened historically, but within the mythological canon, we have a different narrative. Cicero, a Roman statesman and philosopher, referred to many different figures as Hermes. This is possibly due to the fact that many authors would sign their books as Hermes Trismegistus, crediting the knowledge that they have put to script to whom they believe gifted it to them. Cicero cited that the fifth one of these Hermes is the one who killed Argus Panoptes and freed Io. This crime caused Hermes to flee to Egypt, bringing people, letters, and laws, and it was here he was given the name Thate. Look, there are many other ways in which the two are linked, but what is important is that the two gods, Hermes of Greco-Roman myth and Thoth of Egyptian myth, culturally combined into the Hellenistic figure Trismegistus. Now, Trismegistus is more traditionally linked to the Hermit Arcana, but many of the attributes slide well into the archetypical magician, a wise sage, virile in nature on the path to enlightenment. Junpei's Hermes evolving into Trismegistus can be seen as a symbol of this transformation from young and naive magician into learned and experienced hermit. Persona 3's themes of how we grow stronger through struggle and grief is then fitting. Junpei acquires his evolved persona after the death of someone he loves, forcing him to value his life all the more. Wisdom, gained through tragic loss, slots perfectly into the hermit associations that Trismegistus normally implies, as well as Persona 3's overall message. The name Trismegistus translates rather literally to Hermes the Thrice Greatest. They are a legendary Hellenistic figure and author of the Hermetica, a book of stories containing the foundational beliefs of Hermeticism. The epithet Thrice Greatest is largely thought to be in reference to the phrase Majstu kai Majstu Theo Magelu Hermu, or the greatest and greatest god, Great Hermes, taken from the Ibis shrine in Saqqara, Egypt. This name has come to be very interpretive though, as what these three greats are can be debated to no end. Hermeticism focuses on the three major parts of wisdom that compromise all understanding of the universe. There is alchemy, the physical, and various chemical stages involved in the process of turning one thing into another. This can refer to both physical or mental. Astrology, the understanding of stars and the planets and their metaphorical meaning. Note, Hermeticism does not believe that they control our actions, but more so that the meaning derived from the placements of stars and planets should dictate how we act in response to them. I don't mean to be a hater, but modern astrology and Hermetic astrology are not really the same thing. And Theurgy, the power of the gods. Essentially magic, Theurgy is applied alchemy, as it literally translates to science or art of the divine works. As Trismegistus was like the guy for all things Hermeticism, seeing these as the three greats makes plenty of sense. Finding a spot for this idea within Persona 3 did not prove to be very rewarding though. Medea, Chidori's persona, would make potions that restore youth. So perhaps she is the alchemy and Hermes could be astrology, as he often travels between the realms of the gods and the mortal world. Together they become Trismegistus as the representation of Theurgy. It's a pretty loose comparison to be sure, and Hermes or Trismegistus work far better in the realm of alchemy than Medea, but I'm not sure how Medea fits into astrology or Theurgy more explicitly than anything surface level. With this in mind, let's explore another avenue. The tarot often uses the number 3 as metaphor, mainly for things like the 3 Supernals, the 3 Sephiroth atop the Tree of Life, Bina, Hokmah, and Kether. Bina, as the realm of understanding, generally refers to the understanding we get through life experiences. We've talked briefly about Bina before, but an aspect I didn't address was complete repentance. For Junpei's persona to encapsulate a divine aspect of learning from your mistakes could not be more fitting. Hokmah is the Sephiroth of wisdom, specifically divine wisdom. In contrast to Bina, this knowledge is gained specifically from your divine self or a higher plane. Wisdom from Hokmah is considered to be the height of knowing in your personal self. The method in which one would achieve this is not so simple as self-reflection or accruing more intelligence. As this is a divine state of being, how one becomes enlightened may come down to the individual, but it is generally done through will of creation. If I were to ponder a guess, Trismegistus may represent Junpei's will to bring Chidori back, or keep living on for her memory. Perhaps his will of creation came from his union with Chidori specifically, as she became what Junpei really fought for to end the Dark Hour. As Hokmah and Bina are opposite energies of masculine and feminine aspects, I feel as though this interpretation makes a lot of sense. Either way, I believe Junpei's acquisition of Trismegistus is his moment of divine ascension. By journeying through these aspects, you reach Kether, the Supreme Crown, the height of divine power and oneness. The magician being connected to this already makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the magician's number is 1, representing wholeness, the idea of the singular. After his arc, Junpei is a very complete person. In the aftermath of Persona 3, whether it be the Answer or P4AU, he seems to be almost incorruptible, that who he is now was who he was always going to be and will be until his last. Frankly speaking, Kether is kind of hard to pin down thematically, since as for most stories, it is the end goal, the finish line. It is the great crown to strive for, though at the same time, it is also where every other divine aspect spawns from. But that's what I mean when I say Junpei was always going to turn out this way, because it was his true core being, his supreme crown, where all of his actions came from. I think that is what makes Junpei such a phenomenal character, that yes, of course he changes, but he is still very clearly the same person we met so long ago. And in a series where it feels like so many characters past their introductory game, or even their introductory arc, gets sort of warped or perverted, this is incredibly refreshing. The three Supernals are very closely tied to Wait's pack, as they have a more divine aesthetic compared to Mercai's and Toth. As P3 seems to take the most inspiration from Wait's deck, I feel as though through the Supernals we'll get closest to the game's most intended meaning. That doesn't mean there aren't other paths of interpretation, I'm just rather fond of this one. Looking back at Trismegistus as a figure, we don't really have a lot of info. He is rather elusive in terms of him being the center of any sort of narrative. He wrote the Emerald Tablet and is the author of As Above, So Below. He is seen as the ultimate truth seeker, but I feel like that isn't really a role specific to him. Plenty of mythologies and religions have a figure like this. He was thought to be a contemporary to Moses and taught people from all over the world. One could argue that Junpei, being an everyman teaching the other members of Seas and the Answer, could represent this aspect, but even I feel as though that is a stretch. And anyway, not much of this stuff really comes through in the persona design, nor the events surrounding him. Therefore, a lot of what we can take away from Trismegistus will be his origins and hermetic teachings. So strap in, this is about to be a lot. Many religions focus on the idea of ascension or an afterlife of some sort, and much of it is attained through a specific type of enlightenment. The idea of enlightenment alludes to escaping the physical and retreating to the spiritual. Think Valhalla, a form of enlightenment like Buddhism, or just any sort of heaven afterlife equivalent. Hermeticism aims to bring the spiritual to life, to embody the true and beautiful in the world. Hermeticists are world affirmers in that way. They believe this life is the only one and the only existence we get. To them, there is only one reality, the spiritual light that everything comes from, otherwise known as God. Hermeticism doesn't believe in opposites. There are no binary moments between one thought and the other, but successive levels of understanding, a natural progression to enlightenment. It is not our jobs to reach gods or become like them. We are humans, not gods, and our journey is not the same as theirs. The Hermeticist wishes to leave the webs of ignorance and achieve Eusebeia, reverence for the god in complete wholeness. One must have full admiration of the true, the good, and the beautiful to do so. The gods can forgive everything except irreverence, as responding to the gift of life with ignorance and passiveness is the greatest sin of all. Some beliefs think that to become enlightened, we must escape our body and reunite with the spiritual. Hermeticism believes we can do this whilst still alive. We are not trapped by the realm of matter because it is our realm. Okay, I understand that is a lot to throw at you, and this is probably not the ride you expected from the video about the game with Operation Babe Hunt in it, so let me do some elucidating. Persona 3, as a game about death, naturally brings up thoughts of the afterlife. It is a topic broached by a few different characters in the story, with reference to morality and the final destination. To heavily generalize the themes of the game, Persona 3 is about how death gives life meaning, that it does not matter where you end up when it's all over, but rather that the journey was experienced with care, effort, and good faith. Hermeticism touts that God is everything, not a person or divine figurehead, but existence itself. In this way, to achieve a higher state of being of any sort, interaction with the world, i.e. God, is necessary. Reverence for God then becomes a reverence for everything, as they are the makeup of all things. Doing some math here, that would mean that an appreciation for life inherently connects you to God. As the cast of P3 learns their separate lessons around the appreciation of life, they become closer to the divine by being more human. This is a neat way to view their personas evolving, as a lot of them turn from gods or demigods into more grounded human-like mythical figures, like Hermes and Trismegistus. The main metaphorical antagonist of P3 then becomes even more relevant when compared to Hermetic teachings, that the greatest offense to God and life is to be irreverent and not have care for yourself or for others. In a single word, apathy. I am speaking in a much broader manner here, referring to the story as a whole, but I would like to recall the magician as the proverbial starting line of the story. If the fool is nothing but with infinite potential, as the Persona games often like to allude to, then we can see the magician as the first act of the story that informs all further events. Hermeticism being heavily attached to the number one major arcana allows us to view most of the story through its teachings. At least, that's how I see it. So remember back like over an hour ago when I was confused about Toth's writings being a means of both clarity and illusion? Well, Hermeticism gives us an answer to why that may be, starting with the idea of gnosis. The Greek word for knowledge, it was often used in Hellenistic religions to refer to a specific type of knowledge, usually divine in nature. Gnosis is not obtained through argument or traditional knowledge, but through divine realization, that realization being that the mortal is no different from the divine. Gnosis is not an expression of faith or belief, but of knowing, specifically in the divine. Writing is what allows us to recall the teachings of those from long ago, but also devoids us of direct experience, the defining principle of gnosis. Believing we have access to knowledge, true knowledge through writing, is an illusion. Though Toth also proposed that writing is the gateway for personal enlightenment, that since we cannot truly experience knowledge through writing, the conclusions we come to on our own are, in a way, true knowledge. That being said, this is only through the Egyptian languages, as other further translations will muddle the meaning. Yeah, Toth is the type of guy who will shame me for watching sub or dub and not learning Japanese for the most pure and authentic experience. God, what a dick. I don't want to get too lost in the weeds here. I've stretched the connections between Persona 3's personas and the deeper world of the magician thin enough. Plus, there is plenty left for you all to explore, things I feel as though are relevant but somewhat step on the toes of topics I've already covered, such as the hierarchy of reincarnation, the 12 vices, the 10 lights, Logos and Nous, how death is an illusion, and how we are actually greater than the gods by being able to achieve both mortality and immortality, encompassing both divine and matter. To tie this all up in what I hope is a thematically cohesive bow, I'll end with this. The actual teachings of Hermeticism are done through a master and pupil, and the Corpus Hermeticum, a series of 17 books on Hermetic teachings, explore the relationship between three masters and pupils, one of which is a father and son, Asclepius or Imhotep, and his son Tat or Toth. Junpei's relationship with his father has left him without someone to teach him a good path in life, leading him to become who we see at the beginning of the game, irreverent and foolish. Junpei never truly gets a new teacher of life, for lack of a better term. He has to reach his divine realization on his own, and if the magician is about wholeness in oneself, I find it fitting that the manifestation of Junpei's emotions becomes a great historic teacher of life. In this way, Junpei becomes his own master.
And I think that if it wasn't for you and the rest, I wouldn't have that feeling, even with this power. Or worse, I might have done the wrong things with it. So, thanks.
So yeah, there was a lot more thought put into the choices of the personas in each arcana than I originally thought. I found that not only did most of the personas represent the magician arcana well, but they each represent aspects of the arcana separately, even things I didn't cover, such as Pyrojack being the magician as the huckster. The prominent trend amongst all the personas seems to involve transformation, whether being a catalyst for it or the subject of it. But change can be a pretty nebulous subject matter. All of the characters go through changes. What makes the magician so special? The general theme to me is split between two ideas: the magician as a transitional medium and the role of those who stay the magician. Sati, Pyrojack, Rongda, and Hermes all feel like they focus on changing within themselves. Some of them change for the better, some for the worse, and some change as punishment or by choice. Rongda and Pyrojack, whom I didn't cover, both become who they are as a consequence. For Jack, this was due to his actions. For Rongda, it is the circumstances she was placed into. The other half, Jack Frost, Necomata, Oribus, Trismegistus, and Cert, are beings who desire to bring about change. Jack Frost changes the seasons, Oribus delivers secrets to those who summon him, and Cert wishes to bring an end to the world so it may start anew. They disrupt the status quo, and come to think of it, I feel like the Magician Boys in P3, 4, and 5 all follow this trend in a way. Starting as those who live passively, having life happen to them, and becoming changed for it, to those who go out of their way to disrupt the status quo by being their single-minded, strong-headed selves. The Magician Arcana is about change, inward and outward, but perhaps more specifically, it's about the process of change and the power involved in accomplishing it, one's inner potential made manifest. That's why fire is such a predominant part of the Magician Arcana personas. Fire is the most recognized form of chemical change, to a point where it has become a symbol for both creation and destruction. Fire is power, change is power, yet neither exists without a medium for it to happen to. Change is progressive, it doesn't happen all at once. In the same way fire does not eradicate matter but use it for energy, we don't change by destroying our old selves, but by remolding the pieces we don't like into something healthier. The Fool's Journey is probably an idea you've heard in passing many times before, most likely in reference to Joseph Campbell's monomyth or Hero's Journey. It is the idea that one's experience of life can be broadly defined by the stages associated with the 22 major arcana. The exact term of the Fool's Journey seems to come from Eden Gray's The Tarot Revealed book, written in 1969. Essentially, Waite described the path of the soul through the major arcana of the tarot, which was then summarized and recontextualized by Eden Gray, and people ran with it. The problem with understanding the Fool's Journey is that its basis doesn't really seem to come from anywhere rooted in the traditions of tarot. It is a very modern reading that has no official authority. That being said, it is hard not to connect it to the Persona games. The main character is a fool on a journey. In Persona, I see the Fool's Journey as two sides of one coin. On one end, we have the core ideas represented through the larger story and mechanics of the game. On the other end, we have the individual, the internal changing of the characters. In this case, Minato specifically. Look, yes, he is a silent protagonist, but he is not completely devoid of character traits. He explicitly has a backstory that affects the events of the game, and the fact that Kotone has different dialogue options shows at least there is some intention of characterization between the both of them. As our POV character, I feel as though their experience matter, especially since they are so closely tied to the events of the story. For each arcana, I want to look at the Fool's Journey through both of these lenses, as I feel they can help us better understand the message of the game as a whole, and just because it's genuinely interesting. Since the Fool's Journey is intended to be read in sequential order from 0 to 22, it would probably be the most relevant to compare it to a part of the game that does so as well. Full Moon bosses from Magician to Hanged Man are experienced the same way. Huh? What about when we get past the Hanged Man? Anyway, since there is no Fool boss, where do we consider the Fool's Journey to truly begin? I think it's easy to connect the idea of beginnings and the essence of nothing to the action of starting the video game, or maybe the Fool's Journey starts once you sign Pharos' contract. I believe the Magician arc starts when Minato overcomes an action when the Full Moon Magician boss encounter happens on the rooftop of the dorm. A traditional Fool is a watcher. They comment on the world around him, but rarely interfere in its actual state. After being led around and left in the dark during his first days at the dorm, the moment he picks up the evoker and summons his persona is Minato removing himself from this passive role. This will be a trend with the Full Moon bosses and the arcs they represent. The events leading up to the encounter represents the current position on Minato's journey, and overcoming the boss is the transition into the next one. We can also see this in the Priestess Full Moon boss fight. Now the leader of the Execution Squad, this is Minato's exit from the Magician Arcana and into the Priestess. Utilizing the wisdom of the Magician, Minato stays calm and makes the right decision, leading him, and you the player, to defeat the Full Moon boss. Uniting the opposites of patience and action is how Minato concludes his arc. By understanding the value of both, Minato saves not only his and his teammates' lives, but also everyone unconscious on the train as well. This point is well worth looking at because our enacted will has actually done something for the first time. Consider the fact that up until the full moon boss that sees his actions in Tartarus has gone largely unrewarded. The changes they make, if any at all, are essentially unnoticeable. The goal is to reach the top of the tower and learn more about the nature of shadows and apathy syndrome, but what this does for the issue in the immediate is negligible. Stopping the train and defeating the priestess are the first actions the party takes that have positive consequences for the events of the story. This is the first time you truly save lives, and afterwards cases of apathy syndrome begin to go down. The enacted will of the magicians changed the world around them for the better. On a smaller domestic level, this arc teaches Minato how to have a cool head and take action when necessary, but the lesson of the magician probes deeper into his character. So, to re-establish some important details, Minato's parents both died in an accident on Moonlight Bridge several years ago. Not only did they die when he was very young, but also right in front of him. Minato's experience with death is long and intimate, which makes him uniquely qualified as our perspective fool. This is the interpretation the movies take for his character, but it's not hard to parse this meaning from the game as well. You learn pretty early on about Minato's family, and whilst we aren't aware of the circumstances of it just yet, it's clear that Minato has experienced a lot of death in his life. When he first lost his family, Minato was powerless. Now he decides to take action and save the people around him. It certainly isn't the most revolutionary take, but I feel this moment inscribed in the player and Minato that lives can be saved, and we mustn't resign ourselves to death or the dangers around us when there's something to be done. The active magician would change the world around him, not just observe and comment like the fool. A simple lesson, but one important for someone like Minato who has this air of uncaringness to him towards the beginning of the story. This arc almost mirrors Junpei, who in this moment is all action with little thought. His goal is selfish, to take all the glory for himself, not even considering the danger he has put everyone else in. That being said, we can see later that Junpei learned from this experience, though perhaps not as gracefully. I'm not really trying to hide that the Fool's Journey isn't my favorite way of seeing the tarot, but I have to admit I did enjoy taking this little bite of the game and realizing what it does for the greater narrative, and I guess I have the Fool's Journey to thank for that. I hope this can be the case for every Arcana, even past the Hanged Man, which I genuinely don't have a plan for. I'm just hoping I can see into the narrative code and pluck out an arc for the later parts of the game, but we'll see. Maybe the Fool's Journey will help me add structure to that experience. Anyway, moving on. At this point, I hope it has been pretty obvious that the prominent and even more obscure aspects of the Magician does come through in P3. It is the DNA of its story and characters, all of them, from the main character to their support, from protagonist to antagonist, and its main story characters, as well as its lesser supporting characters. Yep, we're talking about them. And I do mean lesser. If you've hung around the Persona 3 fandom or even played the first couple of hours of the game, you've seen this guy and know that he isn't the most well-liked. Kenji Tomochika is your magician alternative for when the real stuff is just too good. A fellow second year at Gekkokan High, he is a slacker pervert who often gets stuck in his own world. Frankly, he's a lot like Junpei, but with the factory settings adjusted to be a lot less self-aware and way more horny. So horny, in fact, that this man is literally trying to get with his teacher. I mean, God, what a disgusting thought, like reducing men down to this slime of perverse base creatures. I mean, for real, I can't even understand it. So yes, the main reason Kenji is disliked is due to his pursuit of teacher pussy, and how his entire link revolves around his relationship with said teacher. He certainly isn't outright hated by the community though. He has fans and is more memed on than despised. I definitely remember him being more hated a couple years back, but people seem to have calmed down on Kenji now. Probably because the target of their ire has moved to a far more deserving target. Where do I stand on Kenji though? Does he work well within the Persona 3 magician archetype? Will Hashino ever decide if dating your teacher is wrong or not? He's alright, yes, and probably not. Kenji himself is not really my cup of tea as a person. Like, I don't find his personality very appealing, and it doesn't really have anything to do with his sexual preference. You can like older women, and you can find your teacher attractive, but actually pursuing that as a high schooler? Look, he's an idiot, like grade A dumbass material, but not in the way your actual friends are idiots. Kenji is delusional, and personally, I'm not really on the boat of, oh, he reminds me of me and my friends from high school, which is a take I've seen thrown around by his fans. Wow, for someone who said Kenji is, quote, pretty alright, those are some harsh words. That's a fairer assessment. I do like Kenji, just in a different way that I like a lot of the other social links in the series. Amongst the stressful lives of the young and the existential nature of the older, Kenji's social link is really damn funny. Like, in rank 4, Kenji attempts to ask out his teacher, Miss Kano, only for her to ask him out first, except, of course, she phrased it as a private lesson, which Kenji interprets as something else. Whilst Kenji is celebrating his dream come true, it dawns upon you just how dumb this motherfucker is. Kenji goes to ask his teacher out on a date, which is stupid enough in its own right, but as soon as Miss Kano sees him, she thinks, oh god, this kid, I should probably make sure he passes my class. In this moment, where a teacher is genuinely concerned by how brain dead one of her students are, that she wants to take time out of her personal schedule to help, Kenji's horny ass sees this as her asking him out. The very next rank opens with this line. Man talks like he has been with this woman for months and waxes philosophically about how attractive people like him and Miss Kano are meant to be together. Kenji has become insufferable in a matter of days, depending on when you did the last rank, to the point where the narrative dialogue specifies that Minato ends the conversation and returns to the dorm, just to emphasize how annoying Kenji is being. In rank 7, Kenji decides that he is going to marry Miss Kano after graduating because he saw a magazine in her house about becoming a bride. This stresses Kenji out, but decides that it's the right thing to do since their relationship is so serious and all. Kenji then loudly proclaims his love for the soon-to-be Emery Tomochika in the Wild Duck Burger cafeteria, to the point of exhaustion. The rest of the social link plays out pretty expectedly. Kenji finds out that Miss Kano is getting married to another man, and it really breaks his heart, which, I don't know, am I a monster for still finding this kind of funny? Like, to me, this was fairly obvious the whole time. Kenji was just totally blind to the reality of what was going on, so him having this big meltdown, whilst I believe was meant to be played in earnest, still has me chuckling a bit. I do feel for him, though. The social link isn't totally devoid of serious things to think about with Kenji. In the third rank, Kenji mentions that he is sick of life, that he is bored with the routine he has found himself in every day. He describes his life as waking up, going to school, coming home, eating, and watching TV. From this line of thinking, he decides that he must get a girlfriend. Perhaps this is too generous of a take for Kenji, but whether he knows it or not, his thought process shows that he finds life boring because he has no one to share it with. Sure, he has friends like Junpei and Kaz, but nobody to share a deeper bond with. Later on in rank 6, we can see Kenji foregoing a shallow hangout session with Minato to look into a cram school that Miss Kano put him onto. Kenji elaborates that investing in your future is probably more important than getting ramen. He is breaking free from the cycle of his boring life, finding interest in school not because of what it is, but what it can do for him in his future, specifically with Miss Kano. He also shows concern for Minato, saying that he should also think about his future, so Kenji still genuinely cares for his friends, he's just discovering deeper levels of affection. Once the whole ordeal with Miss Kano has settled, Kenji is largely back to his old self, eating ramen with Minato. He reflects on his experience with Miss Kano and laments that his favorite TV show has gotten cancelled. As he reminisces about his past, he tells Minato that hanging out with him is never boring. He still wants a girlfriend though, of course. He says that he was sad when Emery left, but not so much anymore. He posits that he may not have really loved Emery and just loved the idea of dating his teacher, which is surprisingly mature for Kenji. I also enjoy that Kenji acknowledges that he really does like hanging out with you. Back in rank 3, before everything goes off the rails, he just wanted life to be less boring, and his goal to do so was through companionship. By the end, he does achieve this, not through Miss Kano, but through Minato. It's all just very sweet, I find. As a slacker with little aspirations, it makes sense that finding someone that gives him purpose is a good goal for him. When he is with Miss Kano, Kenji tries to be better for the sake of their future. So does Kenji develop as a character? I'd say so. When his unnamed TV show comes up a few times during the social link, he mentions it as a part of his boring routine that he bemoans. I think this TV show can be representative of Kenji's immaturity, being a vice he gives into every day, even abandoning you for it early on in the social link. This transforms into something he misses not having time for anymore, and then into something he misses having once it's gone. I feel like this is not just his immaturity fading, but also the impossibility of going back to that previous state. This experience has changed Kenji. His perspective on dating and who he should date has changed. He can always revisit those memories or prior episodes of this TV show, but never again will there be a new episode. So what does this social link tell us about life and death and time? Well, death, I feel, is strongly covered by the heartbreak Kenji goes through and the death of that former self once it happens. Anyone who has been through heartbreak knows that it truly does feel like the death of something, whether that be of love or oneself or the person you were once in love with, maybe literally but more often than not emotionally. It hurts, and it's safe to say that despite what he says at the end about truly loving Emery, Kenji's feelings were very real. Time in life is covered by what Kenji mentions in Rank 3, his boredom and desire to make things more exciting. He is young, and even now he feels like he is wasting his time on a routine that doesn't do anything for him. Ultimately, he gets a little more than he bargains for and gets himself really hurt, but it isn't all for naught. Kenji doesn't just get a lesson learned from this experience, he gets a friend, someone who is there for all these life-changing moments. He still wants a girlfriend, but it comes from a much more informed place. When Kenji was with Miss Kano, he studies harder, drops the things in his life he feels are weighing him down, and does it all for his future. What Kenji learns, hopefully, is that he needs someone in his life that'll push him and make him want to be better. Sometimes it's hard being personally responsible, but having someone to keep us honest and truly want better for ourselves so that they can be happy is what it takes to get moving. Life is absurd and crazy, and you never know for certain what will be around the corner, but going with it all, having fun, getting hurt, and bouncing back to reflect on it all is what Kenji teaches Minato, I feel. At the beginning of the social link, Kenji describes Minato as very serious, and considering the other company we see Kenji keep, it hints at the arc that you're meant to consider is how to let go and just have fun. Huh. You know, maybe that's why all of the correct answers in the social link ranks continuously push Kenji to make mistakes and dig himself into a deeper hole. This is Minato just going with the flow and having fun with it all. What I feel the Magician truly conveys throughout all of its aspects within Persona 3 is the potential of change within the young. As time goes on and we get older, it is a fact of life that our thinking becomes more inflexible. We become more aware of the structures of the world around us and in turn somewhat obsessed with them. It is understandable though. I'm not here to say that this is a form of flawed thinking. When we age, our lives become more focused on the systems we live in and our problems become defined by how to navigate them or perhaps even how to escape them. Persona, for better and for worse, is largely defined by the young and their perspective on the world. Much of all the games revolve around a cast of young kids challenging the status quo of the world they live in. Sometimes this is more about how only the young can change the world because of their unique outlooks, or how they have a greater stake in the future because of how young they are. Kenji encompasses a more domestic, internal change. His change really only has consequences to his own life, but of course it still matters to the themes of the Magician. Kenji is allowed to be dumb, allowed to make mistakes, and allowed to explore his wild fantasies with little consequence because of how young he is. It is through this exploration and reckless behavior he learns more about who he wants to be. He does mature by the end of his social link, even if you have to look a little deeper. I think the idea that Kenji is still looking for a girlfriend by the end of his arc can be seen as him regressing backwards, and all this social link was meant to accomplish is to watch an idiot think he's dating his teacher. But after giving it more consideration, I found myself enjoying and even respecting Kenji a lot more. His continued desire to have a girlfriend comes from him recognizing that having someone that makes him want to be better actually makes him better. I don't feel it is uncommon to have your partner make you feel like a better person, and I feel like Kenji's social link specifically captures this experience. Kenji is still, at the end of the day, a bit sleazy, and he should probably have a little more personal discipline, but, you know, he's young. He's got plenty of time. I have always loved Persona 3, but for the longest time, I was more of a Persona 4 person. The whole package of brighter colors and upbeat music, expressive characters, just hit me in a very good way. I think this is largely due to my age at the time. Being roughly around the age of the characters in the story made the experience of what they were going through much easier to understand and connect with. That isn't to say that the story doesn't connect with me now, or that Persona 3 has a more mature story because it's about a more universally existential subject matter, but it does feel different today. I am older. I am more wary of things like death and my potential and inevitable fleeting youth. When I once looked at characters like Junpei and Kenji as silly little men with their touching and not so touching romance stories, I laughed and wondered if I would ever have these experiences. Now, much past the age range of every version of these characters, I feel as though I can still look back and have the same wonder, just in a different way. For Kenji, I now see the lesson he learned, but only after experiencing it myself. And while it may be a bit pretentious to say so, I see myself as sort of a teacher of this lesson to my friends and family who have yet to learn it. Junpei, I look back and see how hard change can be, but that everyone is capable of it. He is advertised as a man with very little prospects, but we know that he is more because of the quality of his character. A character that can bring light back to any room and soul to a life who has abandoned it. I look at Junpei and I don't want to be young again, but I wish to encompass a lot of the aspects of youth, specifically the things that time and age makes us forget. Straightforwardness, unconditional kindness, and an incorruptible sense of right and wrong. Change is scary. It's a phrase that has been thrown around a lot, especially lately. I think the common interpretation is that change is scary because going from a circumstance you are comfortable with to something very foreign is hard to deal with. That certainly makes sense. The last nearly 5 years now has shown us just how quickly we need to adapt in the face of a worldwide threat. But another way to look at it is change is scary because what if I don't do it right? What if the way I change isn't for the better? What if the risks I take don't pay off? What if I'm a fraud? To me, this is how change is scary. The world may change and I can adapt, but if it comes down to personal change, where I am the only one responsible for the consequences of the path I take, how does someone even begin to bear that weight? Change is powerful, and much like the magician, that power can be used for good or for evil, and when it comes to change inside all of us, I think we owe it to ourselves to make that change as positive as possible. We don't do it alone. We never do it alone, not really. But the effort, the power to change always comes from us. We are made up of every moment of our past, and those moments lead to the present we are all at right now. So when we change, the person who has been here the whole time is the one who does it. In that way, I guess change isn't binary moments between one thought and the other, but successive levels of understanding of ourselves. Our personal journey to enlightenment. I think the beauty of The Magician, and likely many of the arcana to come, is that these stories are eternal. That from ancient myth and folktale to goofy anime teens and their fans, that their message still reaches us. It may just be so I can feel better about all of the uncertainties in life, but what Toth says about the essence of writing really resonated with me. That yes, maybe we can never truly 100% know exactly what everyone before us meant in their writings, but that some of it must have come through. We take what they left us and reimagine it in helpful shapes to navigate life in the modern age. I'd like to believe that the authors of these ancient writings would appreciate our attempts to keep their teachings alive, even if they are not exactly what they may have wanted from us. But it may just be that these enlightened individuals could see the through line humanity has created, even thousands of years down the line, because no matter what, across centuries and evolving cultures into different mediums of expression, they were still made by people with the same intentions: to teach. Thanks for watching.